and I find it really difficult to deny that there does seem to have been one original human spiritual tradition at some point in history that then broke apart into all these various, Hindu and Eastern and Western streams of thought. Uh, but I also seem to be unable to deny that there's something important going on in terms of the historical unfolding of humanity, and that we have to pay attention to this particular process and this civilization and this community that's trying to manifest itself on the earth in a way that's never happened before. And I think that calls for maybe a kind of spirituality that wasn't provided for us by some original revelation, in the ancient past. So I also tend toward the evolutionary side, but I don't know. Where do you stand on this, Jer?
I mean, this doesn't this sound exactly like we're saying about the whole original unity, the separation, the return, and the novelty within the return. It's sort of like maybe there is, like, I know I mentioned this earlier to Benton, like I think our first conversation, we were talking about this idea very generally, and from reading Iliad just a little bit, and how he talks about the ancients having this very cyclical version of reality where there's just a cycle and it repeats and repeats. And now we have this sort of linear version of time where time isn't a circle, it's just something new in a straight line. It's sort of like when they come together, we have this almost like more like a spiral of, repeating themes or motifs, I guess you could say, throughout history, and yet also a novelty and an upsurgence, if that makes any sense as a visual.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the symbols like Ouroboros, is that how you say it? Ouroboros. And the Kundalini serpent rising. I mean, these are almost like latent symbols of evolution in a sense. I mean, if you could interpret it that way. This sort of merging together of progression and eternity, of time and timelessness, It's just, I think there's plenty of room here to really explore and meld these concepts and see how they kind of organically converge. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think that's part of the strength in the perennial philosophy is they talk about the living original source, the ineffable experience, and how that can slowly be pinned down, that mystical divine experience can slowly be pinned down by institutional forms, language, concepts, things that manifest in their outward forms in multiplicity, but fundamentally from within have a unity. And I think Guénon has a really interesting concept of syncretism and synthesis, and he makes that distinction that syncretism is one that is only intellectual. It's a kind of combination of elements that are thrown together in a melting pot, but it doesn't have like a fundamental inner unity. Whereas synthesis, from his point of view, something that I think as a movement, as a group, the Holy Triad or whatever, we want to accomplish like that synthesis from the standpoint of inner unity and speaking about these things, and take these thinkers, all of them, at their best, and provide a way of uniting them from the inner spiritual standpoint.
Totally. That's the tricky part, isn't it?
Yeah, but I don't think they're antagonistic towards each other, and I think that this conversation is like a first step towards that. I know there's somewhat formal disagreements or whatever in the academy we might be taught, but they're very distinct and separate schools of thought that should never be mixed and so forth and so on. But I don't really buy into all that.
Yeah, neither do I.
Yeah, on some level, the whole disagreement between the perennialist and evolutionist just be a matter of like the necessities of the publishing industry. Just you have to differentiate yourself in order to sell your your material. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not to say that that's why these people are writing the books, just because they're trying to sell something, but it's just to say that the books wouldn't be there unless the publishing companies were able to make money on them, and so they're naturally going to be divergent in that way. So,
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Something I haven't considered.
Because I think,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're both right that there's not any intrinsic antagonism between these two ideas. I think they're both hitting on some fundamental truths, and there's got to be a way for us to synthesize them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a good way is going back to ancient metaphysics and trying to trace fully back as far as we can, which I try to do with my essay in Pythagorean science, the sacred science. And I know, Matt, speaking about the mystery schools in the context of Platonism, I think is a really, really important link. And I'm not so much concerned what went on in these mystery schools, but I'm basically going to follow on the back of Manly People and say that what was given and how these great thinkers were so wise is that they went through initiatory death in whatever context that meant, in whatever ritual or contemplative discipline that stood. In the case of Pythagoras, he really had like a cult or a gathering of mystics and contemplatives. So that school and that very Eastern thing was present right there at the very beginning. And with Plato, I want to, on following the work of Manly P. Hall, I think there was an experience there of his consciousness voluntarily leaving the boundary. So the basic point is that with Plato and with Socrates probably too, and Pythagoras, all of these guys who we look back on the original Western thinkers and the foundations of philosophical schools, we also have the mystery schools that are present there as well. And what these mystery schools allowed these thinkers to do and meditations was experience initiatory death, and I think in a very literal way, of voluntarily leaving their bodies out of the boundaries of the psychophysical complex, attaining direct spiritual knowledge of higher planes, and coming back down and giving exposition of those doctrines. And they did it through Socratic dialogue, and they also did it through myth, as in Myth of Earth, which appears in the Republic, and which contains extremely close ideas to all of what we would normally associate with Eastern mysticism, which is formal recounting of reincarnation, I would argue, experience of celestial harmonies, and the whole nine yards, really. And so that was what ancient philosophy stood for, was mystical experience that is brought down and then talked about.
Yeah, I mean, that's the vital thing, the practice. It always comes down to that.
Yeah, and I think Plato said in one of his letters that you would never see a book or even into writing any of what he really thought about what the truth was, because you're not allowed, if you were initiated into these mystery schools, to speak publicly about what was revealed to you.
Yeah, that's right. And it's an interesting point too, because in the Western tradition, with the mystery schools and all of the people who focus solely on the stream of Western esoteric mysticism, there's a heavy emphasis on secrecy, which is still carried out to this day in terms of a formal writing about it, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it was certainly present back then, because I feel like some of the political figures around at that point would have probably gotten pretty upset at that kind of stuff just floating around. And I think it was just a different world. It was a world where they had to keep it shut up, in a sense.
Yeah.